Hello, Must Readers. I'm Erin Popelka. I founded Must Read Fiction, a place for people who know that life is better with a novel in hand. And I am so delighted to be here today with Caeli Wolfson Widger. Welcome.
Thank you, Erin. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, it's truly my pleasure. A little bit more about Caeli Wolfson Widger. She is the author of two novels, Real Happy Family and Mother of Invention. She lives in Santa Monica, California with her husband and three children, where she also runs a recruiting agency. So, lots going on your side of things. So welcome. And I'm so excited to talk to you today about your two novels. But let's just start like way at the back. Like right when things started. When did you know that you wanted to be a writer?
Well, I think there is an actual moment. I was in fourth grade in my childhood home in Central Florida, and there was an epic thunderstorm at night. And I remember lying in bed and listening to it. And I was moved to dig out my diary and write a poem. And it was called The Night Opera. And as I was writing it, I had, I don't think you have very many true moments of epiphany in life. I think it's usually more of a slow unfolding. Was one. As I was writing it, I had the conscious thought, or maybe more of a clear feeling, that this is what I needed to do. And so there you have it.
Yeah. Oh, and it's a thunderstorm is so fantastically metaphorical in that sense too, because it's so big and so overwhelming and yet so personal, right? It's this thunder, it's this like the sound and the smells and the electricity in the air that's all just like invaded your personal space. So what a fantastic moment to
I know,
realize
it's
that
sort
words
of
are what's
too
going to do.
good, right? It's like, if one of my students submitted that in a story, I might say, like heavy-handed, question mark.
Right? A
Right.
little nostalgic maybe.
Right, a little on the nose. Yeah, but as I remember it, that is the story.
Beautiful, beautiful. And you have a new story out May 2018 called Mother of Invention. Please tell me about Mother of Invention.
So, Mother of Invention is a story about reproductive technology. In a literal sense, it's about a medical trial testing a new reproductive technology that, among other things, condenses human pregnancy into 9 weeks. And there are also a suite of other tools designed to make pregnancy and early motherhood, the first year, let's say, lower impact and sort of more seamless for women so they can kind of get it done and get back to work. And it's really about a cast of characters that are involved with this invention.
Fascinating. Like, what a captivating premise and what an interesting idea. And certainly taps into some pretty big questions that we've been, asking societally for decades. And so tell me a little bit more about, this question of career and family. What drew you to these themes?
Well, the origin of the book was experiencing my third pregnancy, which was the hardest of the three. I think because I had two other children and I was also working full time, starting a business. And Sheryl Sandberg's, smash hit "Lean In" had just been released. To much excitement, and I read it, and it gave me a lot of mixed feelings. The high level of which was, this notion of women having it all. And, in my mind, the question is, do I want it? And is that really possible? So that was sort of the germ for the book. And I didn't really know where I was going, but just viscerally in the moment, being miserably pregnant with a million things to do was on my mind. So I wrote from there. And then, I didn't want to I had ideas and themes in the back of my mind, but I didn't want them to bog down the story. So, it only took 4 years, but I let the characters and the narrative kind of guide me to those ideas, in, what I hope is a complex and nuanced way.
Sure, sure. And you do have an interesting cast of characters, even just right off the bat. You have the two co-CEOs who are founding this startup company trying to get this trial, and then the three women who are going to be in this clinical trial. And so I guess my next question is, since it does really look at this medical clinical trial, and while this is still an idea that you imagined, it feels very grounded in fact. Talk to me about your research process in terms of trying to get the details right.
Yeah. So I am not naturally science minded. I'm not great at fact retention. And so for this book, what I decided, and it took a lot of different iterations to figure out how to filter facts and enough authoritative medical and scientific detail into the book to win the reader's trust and to win to have them believe the book without feeling like, some third part or some, like I was transcribing, something I had read in National Geographic or something.
Sure.
So, really what I did was take in a lot. Anytime I would see something about CRISPR technology, which was still a very hot topic, but at the time there were some things going on like in 2014 and 2015, and it was sort of front and center in the news. So I read and listened to a lot about CRISPR, anything to do with IVF and all of the progress that has been made with enabling women to get pregnant against all sorts of odds, whether that's a health issue, a genetic issue, age. I just sort of I read everything I could, listened to everything I could, but I tried, when I integrated it into the book, my goal was to have it the facts sort of hovering over the story, like just enough to, to make the reader kind of trust me that that this world is a world that is conceivable enough that they could disappear into it without getting distracted and saying like, well, wait a minute, how could they implant the embryos on this day? And, so just enough fact to buy the reader's trust. But a lot, there's probably less research evident in the book now than there was 3 years ago. But I think it still sort of informs the general intelligence of the story, I hope.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And it's true because with a novel, we really have to build this world,
Right.
but we can only tell the stories of the characters in it.
Right.
So it's almost like you do have to have this much research, but only to tell this much story,
Right.
and to kind of see how that all filters in. And I think too that there is that trust between writer and reader, where a reader just has to trust that you got
Right.
the facts right, and then you can just let go. And so there is, all of that research, layers in this level of confidence that just kind of comes through and permeates the narrative.
Yeah, a good friend of mine, and writing teacher, once said that an objective of the author early in the book is to make a promise to the reader that I'm going to take you somewhere and you can trust me to guide you. And I always carried that with me, and tried to establish that in this book, because I think once the reader believes in that promise and cares, they'll follow you anywhere.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for making good on that promise with Mother of Invention. And I'm really curious. So certainly, kind of the premise of shortening pregnancy from 9 months to 9 weeks is a pretty big technological advance. But there's a couple other technological advances that come up in the story as well. Where did you get the idea for some of these other advances?
Well, it's just everything that I wish could be easier, about pregnancy and the early years. Because I think, as much as parenting has evolved and parents are really more co-parents than ever. And the person, the woman who birthed the baby, now more than ever can have an ally in getting through those early years when there is so much need from your child. However, however, there's still more burden, I think, on the mother than anyone. And so, for me, some of those, it's, I don't want to say burden, but challenges that are also great joys. But a big one was breastfeeding. I had my first child back when they still sent you home with a flat of formula. But by the time I had my third child, that was way out of vogue. And, very few moms I knew were formula feeding. And so nursing is one of the best things I've ever done, but it is also a ball and chain. And there's just no way around that. You're away from your baby for more than 2.5 hours and you start to feel funny. And so that was that was one of the things, with the Mamarina, which is the sort of solution that breast formula is modeled structurally after a mother's breast milk, and there's a prosthetic breast that anyone can wear that's modeled after her, and it's a way for other people to breastfeed your baby. And I wish that could happen, And then, some of the other stuff, of course, there's some obvious stuff like, total pain relief without, the weirdness of an epidural for labor and delivery. That's obvious. And then a sort of virtual reality solution for your baby feeling like she's with you when you're away. Because that's the other thing. It's great that we can be moms and work, and more workplaces are sort of coming around to adjust a little bit to what a working new mom needs. But there's still no getting around the fact that being away from a little baby is really hard on both of you. So I thought, well, how could we solve that? So it just came from real problems that I experienced as a mom.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you. Thank you for noodling on those questions and those ideas and coming up with solutions, which at least we can enjoy through Mother of Invention, as long as we're within your pages. So that's great. So your other book is called Real Happy Family. It's your first novel. And I would just love to hear a little bit more about what you learned from writing that novel that maybe came into Mother of Invention, or other lessons that you learned, kind of writing that first book.
It's really interesting. In writing the first book, I think I had the advantage of naivete. I really, I have a background in poetry. I got my MFA in poetry. And I'd taken writing workshops and written a lot of short stories, but I didn't really know what I was doing. I started Real Happy Family when I was pregnant with my second kid. And I just decided, I was in that place in my, 30s, early mid 30s, when I felt like it was time to make something happen creatively or die on the vine. In retrospect, that wasn't true, but I had that sense of urgency, like you're going to be a writer now or never. So I just committed to writing 1,000 words a day until I got to 80,000 words. That was my strategy for writing Real Happy Family. I had a little kernel of an idea first. I had a scene, and that was it. And it wasn't easy, and there was many years of revision and all that, but I think, to answer your question, when I came around to Mother, I had learned much more about structure. I had learned much more about writing or rotating. I write in post third person. That's kind of my point of view, and I naturally gravitate toward that rotating narrators. And so I had learned a lot about maintaining momentum, even when you're changing voices. So I did a lot more, I would say, like mapping and outlining, and things that people, may or may not do. It's just sort of a matter of personal process. But I was much more strategic with Mother, because I wasn't with Real Happy Family. However, ironically, Mother ended up being much, much harder to write, I think, because it's just a bigger book. But yeah, I became more, I guess, conscious of craft.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it is interesting too how those lessons evolve along the way. And I have heard friends who are parents. I do not have children, but friends who are parents talk about their children teaching them what they need to know, like one step along the way. So it's like
Yeah.
they talk about like never quite catching up to their children, but always getting taught what they need every step of the way. And sometimes I feel like writing can be the same way,
That's
right?
actually it's a perfect analogy. I totally agree. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Oh, well, thank you for learning those lessons along the way, because now we can enjoy Real Happy Family and Mother of Invention. And so you stay very, very busy. You in your bio, you run a recruiting agency. And
I
so
do.
and talk about having, clients who work very hard, prioritize their career. I imagine that you deal with them day in, day out. What have you learned from your clients? And did that kind of weave into some of the story of Mother of Invention?
Sure. Yeah. Oh, I learn a lot from my clients. So I live, as you said, on the west side of Los Angeles, which in the past couple of years has become, let's say, sort of the little cousin of Silicon Valley. So there's a lot of young entrepreneurs. There's a lot of tech startups. There's a lot of that energy. And most of my clients are tech startups. And I've learned about sort of action first. I'm really impressed over and over by how they move, their sense of urgency, their fearlessness, how they'll put together a really ambitious timeline for launching a product, launching a website, launching a feature, and just go for it. I mean, the work ethic, the energy, the fearlessness. I mean, there's a lot to make fun of in the tech world, for sure. And I, sort of satirize that somewhat in my book. But by and large, I'm very endeared to my clients and inspired by their focus and their their accomplishment. It's not abstract. They're building things and getting things done, and they're not intimidated by lack of experience, by age, by lack of funding. They just go for it. So
Yeah, which are lots of lessons we all can learn along the way, right? That there's so many things where sometimes you just have to jump into the deep end, and it's gonna work or it doesn't,
yeah,
and,
yeah.
and there's lessons to be learned there too.
And one more thing I've learned from them is it's an identity thing. I've noticed that in these tech startups, a lot of fairly inexperienced people claim senior titles. They claim ownership. They're proud of what they do. And as a writer, it's still hard for me when people say, "What do you do?" To say, "I am an author." And so I've learned to sort of claim the identity that I aspire to.
Oh, that's beautiful. And a lesson we all can learn too, right? That yes, we are the thing that we want to be because we're
Exactly.
striving towards it. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. So I'd like to pivot here kind of on my last question. So you are a mother of three. And so I'd
Yeah.
love to hear you talk about how reading and writing weaves into your parenting.
It's a great question. Well, um, well, my kids and I and my husband are big on storytelling. We have a round table during dinner time. It's if you boil it down, it's a highlight from your day. But it always turns into more of a narrative. My kids are natural storytellers. They love a beginning and a middle and an end and plot and conflict. And so we tell a lot of stories.
Mm-hmm.
And we write together. Sometimes we'll do like an exquisite corpse, and pass a little piece of paper around. But I would say reading is, I said to someone the other day, I think just above all, I'm a reader. And I've really tried to instill that in my kids. They naturally love it. But I try to always supply them with books, always recommend things. I foist everything I can from my childhood on them. And I just want them to be in love with reading, just as a way of life always. And so nothing makes me happier, than walking into the house from being out wherever and just seeing them splayed on the couch or in the backyard or whatever, just oblivious to everything except the book in their hands.
Yes. Oh, it's such a beautiful place, and a place that certainly I have been, and many of the people that are part of Must Read Fiction have known that place, that beautiful place of being lost in a book.
Right. Well, that's what I love. That's what I love about your show, and why I wanted to come on it, is because I do feel bereft when I'm not in a book, when I'm not absorbed in reading a book. So
Yes.
yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you for writing 2 books that we can be absorbed in. And thank you, Caeli Wolfson Widger, for speaking with me today and talking about Mother of Invention and talking about Real Happy Family. Must readers, please do check it out.
My pleasure. It was so much fun, and I'm so grateful to you for having me, Erin.